Hi everybody, in this video we're going to talk about rotations. Okay, so we got three rotation rules that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about 9 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. So we denote this with a big R like that. And then you put the 90 as a subscript. So big R 180, big R 270, like that. Sometimes you'll see it written like this, like, so that's just around the origin. That's what it's telling you. All right. So 180 around the origin. And then this would be 100 and right around the origin. All right. Now, sometimes you'll actually see a negative number. And so I'm going to talk to you about that today. I want you to know what that looks like, why the numbers can be negative. So let's talk about that. So the reason why the numbers are negative is because think of a clock, right? If you think of a clock, the way we read a clock is to the right? So the big hand is here. It starts at the one, and then it goes on down. So this is what we consider clockwise. This is what we consider a clockwise rotation. All right. But in math, when we're talking about angles, we actually do the opposite. We go in the opposite direction, which is clockwise. So counterclockwise, rather. So we call this counterclockwise. Now, this is important all the way up to calculus and pre-calculus. And so if the reason why you name the coordinates the way they do, like you learned back in like the 6th, 7th grade, that we named the coordinates 1, 2, 3, 4, is because we're going in a counterclockwise direction. All right. So we named this 1, this is 2, this is 3, and 4. All right. So this is a positive angle up here. Now, if I go in the opposite direction, let me do it in a different color. I'm going to do it in green. If I go in the opposite direction, that means this is going to be a negative angle. And that direction is clockwise. So that's going to be weird. But let's make this very clear. So that means counterclockwise is positive. Counterclockwise is positive. It's a positive angle, right? And clockwise is a negative angle. Clockwise is a negative angle. All right, so that's the reason why we have positive and negative. It's direction. It's about direction. So this is counterclockwise. If you ever see that the angle is positive, that means it is counterclockwise. If you ever see that the angle is negative, that means it is clockwise. Direction. It's all about direction. Okay, now I also use that information to help me remember how to, which direction I'm going in. Okay, like how to remember the rules. So I'm going to give you a little trick on how to remember the rules. So let's just do this. Let's pretend like we're starting in the first quadrant, right? So in the first quadrant, the numbers are positive, right? The x coordinates are positive, the y coordinates are positive. Now I want to do a 90-degree rotation. So what happens with a 90-degree rotation is the coordinates flip, like so. They switch. So we're going to switch x and y, okay? And if you notice, because we're in the second quadrant now, our coordinate is negative, the x coordinate is negative, and the y coordinate is positive. So that means our rule is going to be negative y x. Now, that doesn't mean that all of our points are going to actually be in the second quadrant, but what it means is that this helps us come up with the rule. So, because we need to memorize stuff, right? I told you you got to just memorize the rules so you know how to apply them. So positive, positive in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, we got negative, positive. Now let's say we want to make another rotation, right? So this is 9 degree, right? Let's say we want to make another rotation. So we start from again, so another 90 degrees would be 180. So here is a 180-degree rotation. fully. So in this quadrant, I'm going to switch the X and Y again. And as you can see in the third quadrant, the X coordinates are negative and the Y coordinates are also negative. So we are going to not switch them. We're just going to multiply the X coordinate and the Y coordinate by -1. Multiply by -1. Both of them, both. And for the first one, we're just going to multiply the Y coordinate by -1 and multiply by -1. All right, just the Y coordinate. All right. Now, so this becomes -x and -y for 180-degree rotation. Now let's do this one more time. We're going to rotate 9 degrees one more time. So 90, 90, 90 gives us 270. Yes? So 270, we're going to switch the X and Y coordinates again. So when you think of a rotation, just think about turning and switching the X and Y coordinates. So we're going to switch the X and Y coordinates again, but this time we're going to multiply the X by -1. We're going to multiply the X by -1. Just the X. And the reason why that is the case is if you think about it in this fourth quadrant, the X's are positives, right? The X right here is positive. But because we switched the X and Y, right? So the Y is positive here, but the Y coordinates are negative because we're down here at the bottom, and this is our new Y coordinate. So that's going to be negative. All right. So that's the reason why the rules are the way they rule. Now, if that's confusing to you, then just look at this, make some flashcards, and remember it that way. But this little cheat tool will also help you remember how to remember the rules. Now, let's go do, I only have one example for this one. Go figure. So let's go. So for the 9-degree rotation, like we said, we're going to switch the X and Y. Okay. And remember, we're in, if I think about my memorization tool, 90 degrees, if I start in the first quadrant and I go to the second, that means my X coordinate, my new X coordinate is going to be negative. So that's the rule. Okay. All right. And now I'm going to just apply that rule to these points. So here's what I do so I don't get confused. I switch first. So first I switch everything. And then I change the signs. Okay, I just switch everything first. Now I'm going to look at my new X coordinates, which is Y, and I'm going to multiply them by -1. So 0 stays the same, negative, 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 like that. So let's take a graph. Let's look at the graph of this, okay? So when you look at it, you see that this was rotated, okay? So we have 0, -2, -4, -4. I'm just checking my points to make sure I did this right. -5, -2, and -2, -1. And so this picture was rotated, okay? All right, so that's a 90-degree rotation. Now let's look at a 180-degree rotation. So with that rule, again, I'm going around my coordinates. So I'm in my third quadrant. I switch the points again. So that's X, Y. And in the third quadrant, both of them are negative, right? So -X, -Y. So that means my points stay the same, right? I'm just going to make them stay the same. First, again, remember I take it in 2 steps to help me remember so I don't mess things up. And now I'm going to multiply my X coordinates by -1. So -2 times -1 is +2. -4 times -1 is +4. -2 times -1 is +2. -1 times -1 is +1. And then 0 can't be negative. So 4 times -1 is -4. 5 times -1 is -5. And 2 times -1 is -2. And voila, I have my new set of points. So let's take a graph of that and look at what that looks like. All right, look at that graph. So you see that is a rotation of 180 degrees. And if you remember that, with a turn, it's not going to look like it's flipped. It's going to look like it was literally turned, right? So that's why the points end up where they are, right? Like this is on the opposite side now, so that we could see that it was actually a turn and not flipped, okay? So there's a difference between rotating and reflecting. All right, let's look at 270-degree rotation. That rule, we're in that fourth quadrant. So Y and X are switched again, but because we're in the fourth quadrant, the new Y coordinate is negative. That's my rule. All right, so let's switch the coordinates one more time. All right, and then we'll change the signs afterwards. We'll change the signs afterwards. We're just switching the coordinates. All right, and so now we're going to change the sign of the new Y coordinates. So -2 times -1 is +2. -4 times -1 is +4. -2 times -1 is +2. -1 times -1 is +1. All right, let's take a look at the graph of this. All right, take a look at that graph. As you can see, it was rotated. Okay. All right, 270 degrees. Another way of saying 270 degrees is 90 degrees clockwise, -90 degrees clockwise. So you would actually either say -90 or you would say 90 degrees clockwise, but you wouldn't say both. So -90 or 90 degrees clockwise is the same as saying 270 degrees counterclockwise. Okay. All right. And that's it for rotation. Thank you for your time. Good luck on your assignment.